Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. One of the most puzzling and controversial UFO sightings in U.S. history occurred nearly 27 years ago in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. To this day, many people who have studied this sighting believe there is a continuing government cover-up of what really happened in 1965. As I discovered on my trip to Kecksburg, some believe the UFO was a meteor, others that it was an alien spacecraft, and still others that it was all an elaborate hoax. Kecksburg used to be just like a lot of other small villages in western Pennsylvania. But in 1965, Kecksburg lost its anonymity when it became one of the world's most famous UFO landing sites.
I happened to look up in the sky and I seen this red fireball.
It sure wasn't a meteor, because I've seen them fall before. I never seen any of them with blue lights on.
And it looked like it made a turn and come back again. And when it come back, it seemed like it went down.
It was December 9th, 1965, a night that many townspeople will never forget.
I got my flashlight and I started down through the woods up to where it was at.
There was no wings, there was no tail section, there was no motors, there was no windows, there was no doors. It was big enough for a grown person to stand up in.
It had like Egyptian writing, like backwards writing on it.
Stars and circles and dashes and lines and things like that.
It looked like an acorn.
It was really weird.
Some claim the UFO wasn't the only thing to arrive that night.
It wasn't too much longer. Down through the woods come two gentlemen. The one gentleman, very ramrod straight, very authoritative voice, crew cut hair. I mean, he just reeked of military. He looked at the object and looked at us. He says, all right, this is now a restricted area. You are all ordered out of here.
Some military people come to the house and just said they'd like to use the phone. They sort of took the house over.
We started talking among ourselves, what's going on. About that time, up here on the road, comes a big flatbed truck in.
The flatbed went down and empty, and they come back. He got out with something on the back of it, covered up about the size of a Volkswagen.
That truck was hell-bent for leather, and if you'd have walked out on that road, you'd have still been there, because they'd have scraped you up with a putty knife. They weren't stopping for anything or anybody, and that began the real mystery of this whole thing.
27 years later, what happened down there in that woods surrounded by fields, if anything happened down there at all, is still a matter of bitter controversy.
You've got this town split into two groups. You got the believers and the non-believers.
There's been some friendship lost, and it's foolish as far as I'm concerned.
I have a brother-in-law that he hasn't spoken to me for 2 years and said that I lied about everything, but I never lied about a thing.
You got neighbors and neighbors that has known each other all their life. Now they don't want to talk because one believes it and one don't believe it.
Just as the town is divided, so too are experts who have researched what really happened in Kecksburg. Planetary expert Robert Young believes that some citizens may have perpetrated a hoax. He claims the UFO was merely a meteor known to have passed over Ontario and several northern states that evening.
Virtually all of the accounts can be explained by people having looked toward and seeing the Ontario meteor.
How about the accounts, though, of the military that turned out in large numbers, kept people away from going down there, a truck that went down into the area and came out? You got eyewitnesses that say, this happened.
Right. I understand it. I have written, signed eyewitness accounts from 61 local people who say that there was nothing crashed here or was recovered. There was no military occupation.
A lot of people probably think you're the government.
Well, sure, yeah, but I'm not.
I don't know how some people can say that nothing ever happened when there were so many people that saw things that night. Something had to happen.
I know what I saw, and I'm not going to deny it. They can tell me I'm lying, but I know that I seen the military in my house that night.
Freedom of Information Act states there was 212 military personnel here that night.
Sightings attempted to speak with the Kecksburg residents who deny anything extraterrestrial ever happened here, but they all refused our invitation to talk. Even the landowner whose property was the alleged crash site remained silent.
I think the government bought them off, or threatened them with something that got them scared half to wits.
Ironically, their refusal to talk has only deepened the controversy. UFO researcher Stan Gordon heard about the Kecksburg incident on the radio the night it allegedly happened in 1965. He's been investigating the sighting ever since.
So much of what we know about the case now, we've learned since about 1987. with the fact that now we have at least 4 different eyewitnesses who apparently saw the object on the ground at Kecksburg. The fact that there are dozens of people independent of each other who don't even know each other yet, who have given us detailed information about what they experienced and saw that night. And they're giving us confirming information that has not been published yet.
The skeptics, and these include the people who own the land and some very substantial citizens of Kecksburg, think that this whole thing is loony. Why do they feel so strongly the other way?
Could be that some of these people were in the wrong place at that time. They were in a position where they didn't see what was going on. And if you see the geography of the area and where the majority of people were that night, they could not have seen the military activity that was happening on the land on the other side of the area down there.
Do you have any hard evidence at all that what went down in the woods near Kecksburg was something other than a meteor, or was anything at all?
Unfortunately not. As in so many of these cases, you have to go by the eyewitness accounts. And in this case, the eyewitness accounts are very, very strong. And again, unfortunately, we don't have that type of information. If this was the case, whether it be a space probe or in other UFO cases, sure, if we had the physical hardware, the mystery would be over.
What do you think it is?
What do I think it is? At this point, and again, this is not conclusive, at this point, the weight of evidence would point in the direction that this may have been a Soviet space probe.
If the object were proven to be a Soviet space probe, then many questions would be answered. If a Soviet device landed in Kecksburg, the government would have been required by international treaty to recover and return immediately any space debris to the country of origin. But retired Army Sergeant Clifford Stone doesn't believe the Soviet probe theory.
If this was of Soviet origin in 1965, the State Department would have released documentation to me under their Moondust files. To date, none of that information has been forth.
Clifford Stone collects government documents about space debris recovery operations, like Project Moondust and Project Blue Fly. He began his investigations in 1965, when, as an Army sergeant, he witnessed a top-secret delivery to Lockbourne Air Force Base, about 200 miles from Kecksburg.
I noticed that on the back of the vehicle, it had something that was covered by a tarp. It was about 10 to 12 foot at the base, 12 foot tall. It looked like a chocolate drop. When my friend told me that every question I ever had about UFOs was under that canvas, I was mystified.
Since that time, Stone has repeatedly attempted to obtain information from the government regarding that object. Each time, the government's response has been the same.
They have taken the stance, by direction of the President of the United States, we may neither confirm nor deny the existence or non-existence of any information that all involve the recovery of unknowns.
Kecksburg remains a town divided. The only thing on which believers and non-believers can agree is that all they want to know once and for all is what really happened on December 9th, 1965.
What would you like to see happen next?
It's time now, after 27 years, that the public has the right to know the true facts, regardless of what the object was or what really occurred. Something came down. From numerous eyewitness accounts, there was a lot of military activity into this small village. Then an object was located, that it was recovered, it was transported away for study. What was the object, and why after 27 years haven't they revealed what really was found?
Joining us now from Houston is spaceflight engineer and author James Oberg, who has studied the reported sighting in Kecksburg and has his own theory about what landed there in 1965. Mr. Oberg, first of all, do you believe that something crashed in Kecksburg in 1965, and was it a UFO?
If it's anything, it might be something a lot more Earth-like. It might be a spacecraft from Russia and not from Mars. It turns out we do know that a Russian probe fell back to Earth that day, and it was a special kind of probe. It was one of their probes to the planet Venus. It failed, was trapped in Earth orbit, and eventually fell out of orbit.
What might have been on that Russian space probe that the U.S. would have been so interested in?
Oh, the most important thing about the probe would be the heat shield. How thick it was, what material it was made out of, how heavy it was. And once we knew that, we could then analyze how big their warheads would be in their ICBMs. The same kind of material was used there. Also, their most advanced electronics would be in that probe. Their most heat-resistant kinds of materials, the very best of their entire military-industrial complex technology. It would have been a treasure trove in terms of the Russian space and missile technology.
Do you think we will ever know with certainty what really happened in Kecksburg?
Well, I guess the dream is that someone will come forward with an official government report. It might exist, it might not. 20, 30, 40 years ago, people's memories, as you know, tend to keep changing and growing as the stories get told and retold. I think there's lots of stories in UFO folklore that we'll never really know what happened behind them. That's the fascination.
James Oberg, thank you very much for joining us.
Good night.
And we'll be back with more sightings in just a moment.